Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NIGP webinar 2021 State of Public Sourcing, Fast and Focused. Today's webinar is being brought to you courtesy of Bonfire. For those of you who have attended NIGP webinars in the past, you know that from time to time we ask someone from outside NIGP to provide their expertise and unique insight into an important issue we want to highlight to our audience. Across the years, those experts have represented both the public and private sectors, academia, and the nonprofit communities. All webinar content is presented strictly for educational purposes only, and it's not intended to be an endorsement of our speaker's organization, products, or services. Today's webinar is being presented by Omar Saleme, CEO of Bonfire. If at any time during the webinar you need tech support, please send me a direct chat. Remember to engage with your peers by making sure you have your chat option selected to everyone. Please submit any questions you have to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take those during specified parts of the presentation. Omar, would you like to get us started?
Yes, please. Yeah, well, Angela.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I would just like to say good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, 2021 State of Public Sourcing Back to Business. A lot has happened over the past 2 years, and today we're going to be taking a moment to explore the effects it has had on public procurement today, as well as the trends we've seen emerging among over 400 public sector agencies and what this means for the future of public procurement. I'm very excited to introduce you to today's speaker, Omar Saleme. Omar is the CEO of Bonfire, an eProcurement solution that brings the entire procurement process online. Having worked with hundreds of public agencies to bring their procurement operations online, Omar believes that procurement teams are strategic drivers within their organization, and he's passionate about enabling those professionals for success with technology. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Omar.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I love NIGP webinars. It sometimes makes me a little bit jealous when I see everybody posting where they're from, especially if it's a warmer, sunnier spot than where I am right now. But I appreciate the live discussion that we always have with you and a lot of the feedback that we get. I learn just as much from these as hopefully you'll take away from these presentations. So yeah, I thought we would just start with kind of like a high level introduction, and then we'll dive into the details of the presentation today. And so, fueled by the return to the office, cities, counties, states are loosening public health restrictions and opening up the economy. Teams are now sourcing for everyday products and services, but also for things that we need to align with, health requirements for COVID. And so after putting many projects on hold in 2020, public agencies are ramping up business in 2021, and we have the data to show it. But there's also new focuses and new strategies that are coming into play that we'll talk about. Now, just to set the stage for the data and the rest of the presentation here, we looked at our own data from across 400 plus agencies, public sector agencies from across North America, to kind of gather these insights. And our analysis examines data for the period of Jan to June for the years of 2019, 2020, and 2021. The reason why we picked that is we published this report early July. And so we only had that 6 months of data for 2021, and we wanted to account for seasonality. And so we took that same period from across those 3 years just to see like to like, how do they compare? And we usually do update the report and we issue it once a year. So at one point you will see what the entire 2021 looked like. So go on to the next slide, please, Angela. So from the analysis, there are some key trends that emerged. And we'll dive into the details of those throughout the presentation. But agencies, basically, if I were to summarize, they're back to business, projects are up, RFPs are back on track. And at the same time, we're seeing there's more emphasis being placed on things like vendor diversity, having to meet new stakeholder and constituent expectations, both internal stakeholders and also vendors in this case. Reevaluating digital transformation efforts made during the pandemic is something that we heard quite a bit. and service delivery. So how do we actually get the procurement projects out there? How do we interact? And of course, kind of reacting to the work from home reality that we were forced to do in 2020, and how that kind of affected the activity in procurement are things that we're going to talk about. Before we actually get started, though, we wanted to kind of get a finger on the pulse to see, just launch a poll for the attendees today to see, coming out of the initial COVID-19 emergency response, what has been your team's biggest priority in 2021? And if none of these, choices here resonate, we would love to hear what other priorities you had in the chat. So we'll just kind of hold this poll up for a little bit, just to give everybody a chance to think and respond, and then we'll see what the results are and then kind of go from there. Yeah, so I'm seeing here Jessica trying to bring in needed materials for operations. Is something that is not on the list here. That's an other. So thank you for that contribution, Jessica.
And we'll give everybody 5 more seconds to get the response in. Looks like we have just about 60%.
Okay.
And here are results.
All right. Okay. So 37% increase the speed efficiency of the process. And that is the number one answer. Doesn't surprise me. It was a time when we had to do more than normal, but sometimes with less staff and doing it in ways that we hadn't done them before. So like work from home. Second here, and there's a tie actually between finding new ways to cut cost and reduce budget. I remember the uncertainty that was looming in 2020 around budgets. And then the one that tied with that was developing infrastructure to work from home. We saw that firsthand, doesn't surprise me either. Diversifying our supplier pool is number 3. We'll talk about that quite a bit today. And then finally, reevaluating digital transformation efforts. And then there were a few others in there as well. So thank you for those who responded. And I would say there's a lot of efficiency with what your priorities are and what our customers had to say and what we've seen them do. So this is very much in line. And I saw one other comment here come from Lori, trying to stay afloat with so much more work and rebidding to do. I hear you, Lori. We saw that too from the customer base. Okay, so with that kind of established, let's go through the first, the first thing that we saw, the first category or theme, which is back to business. And so the way we're defining this is looking at the overall number of projects. Projects here means any competitive opportunity. It could be a simple, RFQ. It could be an RFP. So everything that basically a procurement department does is captured under here. And you could see that like in 2020, we saw a significant dip in the number of projects that were being issued during that time. And if you remember, we're talking about Jan to June. So that was the middle of that period when everybody had to shift from home and priorities were shifting. And then we're seeing now a bounce back in 2021, almost to where we were in 2019. But I would say it's probably equivalent, especially now that we have data for the second half of the year. We're actually seeing 2021 to be a little bit even higher than 2019. And so generally, we're seeing things are going back to normal. The floodgates are reopening, but the flavor, I think, of those projects is changing. I think just because we have to deal with things now that we didn't have to in the past. So we're going to actually zoom in a little bit more and look at RFPs specifically. And the reason why I wanted to look at RFPs is because by definition, RFPs are higher value projects. And, they kind of tend to align well with things that are more strategic to the organization. Quite frankly, things that were probably put on hold in 2020 during that period, and seeing what the trend there looks like. And well, they're actually back to what they were in 2019. And so you can expect to see that, maybe the range of projects that you have are different, but the amount maybe is the same. All this to say, if you're feeling busy in 2021, you're not alone. We're seeing this across the entire customer base. So when you're looking at these RFPs only, we're definitely seeing this, back to business trend emerging loud and clear. And as organizations look to spend recovery funds wisely and strategically, they're seeking, optimal vendors for large-scale projects. And while procurement policies around RFPs vary across organizations, and depending on category, public agencies use RFPs to ensure, fair, open, and transparent processes. And so RFPs are especially important if and when the procurement team is unfamiliar with the product category. We know that firsthand, or you're expecting a high number of competing suppliers because the process helps ensure that you want best value suppliers to be chosen for the job. And there is definitely a move away from emergency measures. So we're seeing a lot of things kind of go back through the regular competitive process, which, by the way, the previous slide wouldn't have captured that, because if you're going through a non-competitive process, then it wouldn't have registered on the previous slide or on this. So we're kind of seeing things kind of go back to normal in terms of taking our time and going through regular procurement practices. But I want to kind of pause on this here. RFPs, when you're actually going and creating them, you're basically trying to get the project off on the right foot. You're trying to do a lot of research at the outfront. What does the scope of work look like for this? And what we heard from our customer base is they're using Google, colleagues, maybe a nearby city. We've even had customers kind of bookmark portals of other clients, other agencies, and they kind of go there and actively download, the project files for open projects, so they can potentially use them for reference in the future. So as we're seeing that increase in activity, we wanted to see how we can help. And that's why we're announcing Bonfire Open Access Community Projects, which is kind of our way to give back to the public procurement space. And it's free to access to all when we launch it. And so if you go to that link that's mentioned here, you can just put your name. And so when we launch it, we'll basically add you to the platform. What you'll expect to see there is 60,000 projects plus, ranging all types of categories from across all states. And you'll be able to go into each one of those projects, filter down based on, what type it is, and again, what state it was from, and download the documents and see what was actually open to bid at one point, and use that as a basis for your research, so you never have to start an RFP from scratch again. And again, that goes into the theme. A lot of projects are being put in. There's a lot of data that's being in there, and we want to just basically put it back into your hands. And so you can start off your projects on a better footing than in the past. So just a quick announcement. Please go to that link and sign up if you're interested. Would love to invite you when it's available in a month or so. Okay, so with that behind us, we're going to launch another poll to set the tone for the next period, for the next topic here, which is, supplier diversity. So how would you best describe your vendor diversity strategy? So let us know. And that has definitely been a topic that we've heard quite a bit about. We actually had to basically launch new functionality to help organizations manage and see who is participating with their projects and their projects in terms of DBE or diverse vendors, because there's reporting requirements that were coming down the pipeline. And so we heard about that quite a bit. And I'm curious to see if this is the same as we're seeing in the client base.
We'll give everybody about 5 more seconds. And here are results.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so actually pretty evenly split. We'll start with the one that registered least with people. It's not a priority at my organization. So the majority are seeing it a priority, but just a mix. You either have an established strategy with clear goals and a plan to meet them. I'd be curious for those who answered that, is this something that happened recently, or this was something prior to the last couple of years that you had to put into place? Vendor diversity is an emerging priority, and we plan to establish clear goals and strategies in the future. And then the second place was actually, we believe vendor diversity is important, but we don't have established goals and strategies in place. You're not alone. We hear that quite a bit. And that's where these demands that I mentioned earlier were coming down the pipeline for us to kind of create better tools for you to track this. So, but we're definitely seeing 95% of those who attended or who responded, either have something in place, it's in the works, or they will have something in the works. That's great to hear. And this sets us nicely for for the next topic here, another focus that came out, which is supplier diversity is a growing priority as we've seen it. And the way we kind of know this is through a couple of things that we tracked and we collected data on. And basically that was, there's a way where you can ask vendors to fill in forms or fields or files, upload files as part of the registration on Bonfire. And we kind of looked at that to see, what does the data say? And is there an increase in basically the number of organizations who are doing this? Well, 10% of our customers, so procurement agencies, have a DBE field. So something that says to the supplier, can you self-identify? Are you DBE? Are you woman-owned business, a veteran-owned business? And sometimes they'll ask additional questions, and we see that in the second stat here. The average number of DBE or supplier diversity-related registration field created per organization is 2. So there's basically like a follow-up question or a follow-up document that was being asked from the suppliers to upload, just to help kind of track the supplier pool within. And that's how kind of we know within our supplier pool how many of those are DBE vendors or not, because we're kind of collecting this data with the help of our clients as well. So, and we're seeing that rising more and more. So that's kind of the first thing. Then we're going to ask ourselves the question though, why is vendor diversity important? And I know this is something that you think about quite a bit, but I want to just articulate it as we kind of go on with the presentation. So first of all, procurement departments have the opportunity, and a very unique opportunity, to play the role, a very positive role in our communities, to promote, the social good for the community by creating a level playing field for disadvantaged, for small businesses, for local businesses. Governments, after all, have a tremendous amount of purchasing power. And to give you just a data point, in Canada, the federal government alone, so not including, academia, municipal, other levels of government, they spend in Canada $18 to $20 billion per year procuring goods and services. So that purchasing power has the potential to create more value for society while still creating economic value. That's the first one. The second reason is, as we know, vendor competition is at the core of securing best value contracts. So engaging disadvantaged and small business suppliers is integral to fostering competition, especially when there's a lot of big players in the market. And maybe a little bit of an anecdote here, but I'm sure some of you can relate to this. Sometimes dealing with a smaller company will actually give you better service. Right? They're a little bit more focused on that. They're maybe local, so they have a special connection with the agency that they're contracting with. So there's actually, beyond just us doing good and helping foster, help these businesses and making sure that we're creating a more of an equal level playing field. We could benefit from this too, because we could get better, more tailored services in return. The third reason here is like policy changes. So we know the Biden administration has outlined intentions, quote, to support small business and tackle inequities in the federal contracting system, including tripling vendor contracting goals for small disadvantaged businesses by 2025. And usually that sets the tone for other levels of government. And frankly, that's what we're seeing, these reporting guidelines and requirements come into play. And so that's why it's important. I know we know all of this kind of inherently, but we just thought we would just kind of double click on that before we continue with the next slide. Okay, so, and this has come up in multiple discussions before, just having the goal of engaging with DBE is important and it's good. It helps us set the strategy and the focus for the organization. But we also have to look at the barriers that exist today that are, eliminating, maybe DBEs from actually entering the process to begin with. And we know this again intuitively. Minority, women-owned businesses probably have fewer resources than businesses not categorized as DBE. So it's integral for us to eliminate as many of these barriers as possible in order to encourage these organizations to bid. And in our latest State of Public Sourcing report, where a lot of this data is coming from, we found that eProcurement or e-sourcing use in public agencies has increased by 38% since 2019. And vendors submitting through Bonfire's e-sourcing solution has increased by 55% since 2019. And so as more and more public agencies adopt online solutions to first post the opportunities and evaluate bid submissions, you need to keep the vendor experience in mind. How are we making it easy for them to participate with our organization? And that especially becomes magnified for small and disadvantaged businesses. And so, you want to ask yourself, are there steps or processes that might create barriers for DBEs? For instance, there are sometimes bidding portals that operate on pay-to-play model. And so that basically creates a barrier and it hides the opportunities behind a paywall. And so now the DBE has to actually subscribe to see what the opportunities are before they actually decide to continue on. And that becomes the first hurdle they have to overcome. The other one here is to just think about the electronic submission versus paper submission process as a basis for this. Don't underestimate the amount of effort in terms of time that it takes to actually print 3 copies and collate and get these binders and go to FedEx and ship them, or maybe even drive them themselves. There's a lot of time and effort that is required to participate in a paper bidding process. But there's also cost. And we've actually done surveys in the past on this. An average to mail out a package of bids, it costs between $300 to $400, including the efforts included in that, like the time spent, but also the shipping costs. And let's face it, everybody's doing this last minute. So they're not paying for, the 5-day delivery from FedEx. They're doing it overnight, right? So it actually increases the costs that are associated with the bidding process. And so if you want to encourage, diverse vendors to start bidding on your opportunities, one of the barriers is basically trying to get off a paper-based process, because inherently that will be way, way less time spent. And we know this time, it's about 8 minutes that it takes the average supplier to put their files into a platform and click submit. And of course, the financial aspect of it too. There's just one small story here I want to mention from Bergen County in New Jersey. By enabling kind of this, because they came online, I think it was in 2020, early on in 2020. And through their process, they were able to find masks from a small vendor instead of the big suppliers, because they happened to match with that vendor through the vendor pool. Which kind of brings me to the next slide here, is how do we get these opportunities in front of businesses? And we have some really cool stats on this as well. So the one surefire way to get opportunities in front of more diverse vendors is by casting a wider net through vendor invitations. 66% of proposals that come in are coming from invited vendors. And in the past 2 years, the average number of invitations sent per project has increased by 202%. So you can see that in the chart. The amount of invites that are coming out per project are averaging about 451. So it's 451 either suppliers that they're being matched based on a commodity code match, like the NIGP code set, for example, or through users creating lists of vendors that they want to proactively invite as well. And so you can imagine having access to a larger pool of vendors dramatically improves an organization's ability to find best value for their stakeholders across different categories. And this translates to more competition in the market, including from casting this wide net. You will have more diverse vendors as part of that mix, local business vendors, and you're going to get probably options that you haven't considered besides the tried and true partners and the big players in the space, and hopefully end up with better outcomes for your agency. And there is a story and an anecdote here I heard from Louisville, Kentucky, where they had a summer program for children, and part of that they were going to give them fanny packs, and they wanted to kind of supply the fanny packs and print something on them. And the first kind of obvious choice was this company that would source these from China, but through kind of being matched with a supplier through Bonfire's vendor pool, they actually found a local supplier. They saved $30,000 and they were able to funnel that money back into the program. And so that's a great story of win-win by being able to identify a local supplier and have it actually cost less, but also benefit the community and pour that money back in. And okay, so we'll go on to the next one. There's another story here from the Great Lakes Water Authority. And so Great Lakes Water Authority, they provide water and wastewater services, but they really wanted to focus on managing and being able to approach their small vendors and being able to engage with them. And by managing competitive events and collaborating with technology, they were able to do this. And this is something that's been kind of a pillar when they joined us that they wanted to do. And we're glad to that they were able to achieve this through their efforts so far. So the point is here, again, to recap, is it is more of a focus for a lot of organizations. And the way to kind of catch more DBEs is by casting a wider net, and also kind of thinking about eliminating the barriers that disadvantaged businesses have to go through in order to submit. Okay, so now we're gonna look. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Omar, I was gonna say, we did have one question come in before we move on. Is Bonfire set up to automatically send to vendors per commodity codes listed within the vendor's profile?
Yeah. So basically, when vendors sign up, they choose which commodity codes apply to them. And then on the procurement side, you tag the project, the opportunity with commodity codes. And then we run a matching algorithm that notifies the vendors both on strong matches and weak matches, depending on how deep you go with the taxonomy of the code. And in addition, when we talk about invitations, you also have the ability to create a list of suppliers, and in addition to the automatic match, kind of proactively say, hey, we're also inviting you to bid on this project. And so those are the two ways that the data from the previous slide came from. Yeah, thanks for the question. Okay, so the other theme that we talked about earlier, eProcurement, or maybe to be more specific, e-sourcing is on the rise. And we'll talk about data on that too. But before we talk about that, is we want to see like some of the catalysts and how kind of COVID affected all of this. And so saying that COVID-19 was a catalyst for abrupt change in government across North America would be an understatement. And you probably know this as a procurement professional because you kind of felt that firsthand. Maybe you had to work from home for a span of time, which meant adapting your process to be able to operate online. We always talk about the double whammy that procurement professionals had to go through. Not only had you had to work from home, but you also didn't have the tools to do it. And there was more pressures on you. You had to kind of get the PPEs and find those suppliers and somehow trying to find somebody to give you sanitizer. And so you felt that firsthand for sure. And you kind of felt it because your access to the office became limited. It forced you to come up maybe with innovative strategies to host public bid openings or receive vendor submissions, or how to get this approval when the person is no longer in the office, just down the office from me here. And the paper-based bidding process not only poses a burden on contracting units, as was clearly shown during the pandemic, but especially with social distancing requirements needed to reopen our communities, but under the current circumstance, it actually poses like a life safety risk, especially at that time. So therefore, it was kind of the perfect time for such regulations to be implemented. So we heard this over and over again, organizations saying, we've been asking for this for years, whether it's e-sourcing technology or even something like DocuSign. And it was passed so quickly during the pandemic. And so they're kind of pleased with that pace of change because they've been wanting to change, but the urgency wasn't there. And we see in many states, starting to implement and make changes, implementing temporary allotment for local units, whether it's the ability to use electronic procurement platform for certain procurements while allowing some to be paper-based. New Jersey Assembly Bill was introduced to allow for e-submissions to happen. Before that, it was actually not allowed. But the thing is here now, as we're kind of, hopefully putting all of this behind us on the pandemic front, some of these are here to stay. I would kind of think about, would you, if you have adopted like an e-signature solution, for example, do you see that going away? think once we've kind of gotten over that initial fear of implementation and maybe the challenge that comes along with that, now that we've experienced how easy and good and compliant these processes can be, it's really hard to take them out. It's kind of like taking candy away from a baby, right? You've kind of experienced it now, and we've gotten over the hump of the change management. And so I would say, I would bet that a lot of these changes are here to stay, even though they were temporarily introduced at the time. We kind of know too much now, and we know how good things could be. So let's look at some data. So when we talked about getting back to business and RFPs, ramping up, despite lower volumes in 2021, which we kind of talked about in the beginning of the presentation, we saw more logins in 2020 on average versus 2019. So that tells us that more people were resorting to platforms to kind of manage their process. And it wasn't so much like a nice to have anymore. So many schools, cities, health institutions, public agencies, eProcurement really became a critical lifeline for them for continuing their operations, delivering essential services. I saw that in the comments come up earlier. So not only did it help expedite critical projects, it also kept procurement teams, internal clients, stakeholders, and vendors connected while everybody was working safely from home. And many teams needed to kind of transition again their activities to online, whether it's consensus meetings, running those through a Zoom call, or even bid openings. We actually had to write a guide on how to kind of run a bid opening in Bonfire online. And just speaking of those changes that stuck, I was talking to a client from New Haven earlier this week, and what they were saying, even though now they're back in the office, vendors have gotten kind of a taste again of how a bid opening can be done digitally. And they're kind of not spending the time to drive into downtown, parking their car and attending this thing. They're just kind of comfortable logging into Zoom and seeing a digital bid opening. So a lot of these things, again, have changed for the better, I think. We're all gotten a little bit more efficient because of this. And again, that trend of logins has continued even in 2021. We're still seeing more people kind of using platforms and relying on those platforms to manage their process. Additionally, those logins also reflect vendor logins as well. And so we're seeing them also kind of access the platform to get like updates, to ask questions, and not just rely on traditional methods, like maybe kind of going in and asking those questions face-to-face, or even, again, doing the submissions face-to-face. And the other slide here that shows a little bit of, hopefully you're seeing that too at your organization. At a high level, 53% of public procurement professionals are in some form of hybrid work in 2021. And so here you see there's only 47% who are expected to work from the office, and then the rest are kind of doing a mix. I think that slide here, the 47 is from the office in the blue bar, not from home. And the rest are basically doing a mix. And so, and I kind of do these informal surveys whenever I talk to procurement professionals. I'd love to see what people had in terms of their organizations today. But there's this trust that was built between, say, organizations and their workforce, that, when we had to work from home, you had to get things done, and you got things done, and you're probably more efficient. And now that freedom, call it, if you want to call it that, has extended even when things are beginning to open up. There's just a lot more flexibility now that's to be expected. And a lot of the infrastructure that was put into place during the pandemic is kind of allowing us to continue that hybrid work environment in 2021. And I would bet beyond that too. Again, anecdotally, a lot of the organizations that I talk to saying that they're not really mandating that everybody has to be in the office 5 days a week anymore. There's just a little bit more flexibility. So all the work, the effort, the lessons that we learned during the pandemic are paying off, and they're here to stay. And that's kind of the major theme that we saw again throughout the pandemic and in the report. And so Finally, we're actually doing really well for time here, and kind of like thinking about what's next, right? A lot has changed. Agencies are definitely back to business. We're seeing that with increased project flows coming in. More RFPs are being introduced. And we are seeing more and more teams kind of turn to Google to kind of manage. I have to buy this for the first time. Where do I find it? So just a reminder, open access community projects is here for you. It's something that you can just get access to. Would love to have you, get benefit from the projects that other procurement professionals are running. The other trend is vendor diversity is an emerging priority, as it is for the group joining us today. No matter the size of the organization, there are things you can do now to make it a priority for your organization. You can make it easier. That might look like investigating what the submission process looks like, the bid submission process. Identify barriers along the way, especially when it comes to small minority-owned businesses. Maybe it's paywalls. Maybe it's owners' requirements that we need from them. Another idea here that I heard from some of our clients is they're doing a lot of outreach. They're kind of approaching people. They're having sessions. They're making sure they know what the challenges are. Some people, believe it or not, especially the small businesses, they actually don't know how to contract with government. They think of it as this like big beast, and it's intimidating to them. And so being able to kind of like dig deeper into those things might be really helpful, as a lot of you are kind of putting together plans for increasing your diverse supplier participation. And finally, more and more organizations are looking into digitization in general and e-sourcing specifically. I think we have been shown now that procurement organizations are essential services within our larger structure of public sector. And what that means is you need to be resilient. I'll give you one other story on that too. When the ice storm happened in Texas earlier this year, people lost power, but then procurement had to go on. We had a client actually who needed to issue an addendum, and she had access to her phone. So she emailed basically her rep, a Bonfire, who managed the project on her behalf. And the reason why they were able to do that, well, we had access to power here, but more importantly, we had access to the system, and we were able to kind of do that, and keep the project on track just during that brief period. So it allows you a lot more resilience, more flexibility. And I think, if anything, the pandemic taught us is, whether it's procurement or whether it's, other services, we have to really kind of think deep and hard about how we make sure that we're prepared for these kind of scenarios. Again, it's a pandemic sometime. It could be an ice storm. Who knows what it could be in the future. And, if anything, procurement came to the spotlight in terms of being such a critical service that we need to make sure they're well equipped should anything happen. So we're just gonna pause here, open up the questions, see if anything has come in, and kind of go from there.
If there are any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat group, or you can also unmute yourself if you feel comfortable, and just ask your question that way. Thank you.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, I would like to get a copy of the State of Public Sourcing. Everyone today in attendance will actually be getting a link to download the copy. So I'm glad you asked that. You reminded me. The presentation deck, Angela, I think we're going to send this out as well.
Yes, we will.
Okay. Yeah, and we will fix that little bar graph there. Thank you for pointing that out before we send it out. Yeah, the pricing, I just saw the question come up there. The pricing is on a procurement user only. And so whether it's subject matter experts or vendors or evaluators, those are unlimited. So you could think of it as relating to the number of procurement professionals who have to launch projects is how it's based. Yeah, there is a contract management module that's available. Some organizations, depending on the initiatives that they have, they want to modernize everything at once, and they kind of go end to end. And when I say end to end, I mean from the intake requests all the way contract management and vendor performance management. Some only want to start with contract management. So it really depends on the initiative of what you're trying to do, but it is available.
Omar, we had one question come in as well. For teams who are still relying heavily on manual workflow, how have you seen them be able to pivot to meet these demanding trends, as well as like their growing number of projects?
Yeah, it's actually, I would say it's been pretty quick, and hopefully I saw somebody who just joined Bonfire before the pandemic, and hopefully they can attest to this. It's pretty easy pretty quickly, because the way it's designed is to mimic kind of your process, and even the language that we use in the platform is made for the sourcing professional in North America, because it was kind of made with the guidance from procurement professionals across US and Canada. The way I would think of it is there's like a training period in the beginning just to kind of know, how to use the platform. The deployment is cloud-based, so it's seamless. And then usually what I would suggest as part of the implementation is to pick a project. Some organizations like to do that and just kind of put it out there, kind of see the process end to end. And then at that point, start increasing the volume of projects over time. Some organizations, what they do is they'll kind of do a dry run, and then they'll set a date in the future, and they say, starting on this date, we're going to go do a go live. And that works too. You're typically expecting between, say, 3 to 6 weeks, depending on what you're implementing in your process, from the time you say, I'm ready, to the time you can start actually doing everything online. Oh yeah, so the contracts module is an add-on to the e-sourcing module to make it sourcing to contract. So it is can be separately deployed or together or combined. And that one, the pricing for that one is actually simpler. It's not on the number of users at all, or the volume of like documents. It's based on a number of contracts that you have. Yes, it is available in Canada as well. Yeah. And just on that question, because I know this probably the next question that's going to come to people's minds, the data is kept separately for Canadian clients in Canada and for US clients in the US. So we have 2 different clouds, and each one has their own jurisdiction where the data is all stored. And, if I could just ask, if you do have any ideas on stats that you're curious about, some things that you're wondering how other organizations do this, and what is the status of this across the industry, please let us know. We have access to a pretty large customer pool. We have access to a lot of data, and we're always kind of wondering, like, what is the kind of data that people would want to hear and want to know? And then we can include that in future state of sourcing reports. So you can do this now, you can follow up later. I just want to put a call out for that in case you do have something like a burning question that you have that you want us to answer for you. Okay, so another question about the contract digital signature. We could potentially integrate with an existing provider, but we are actually building that functionality for digital signature within if you don't have one. So currently not available, but in 2022, the plan is to make it available.
We have another question that has come in, Omar. It says, we have an ERP system. Have you seen teams successfully use these for eProcurement and improving their vendor diversity?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, so some ERPs kind of have a sourcing module. A lot of our customers have ERPs that have a sourcing module, but nobody really likes to use them. The reason is, it's really, ERPs are financial systems. They're made for the CFO and the finance department. And whenever they create something for outside of that department, like say even procurement, they're not really understanding kind of the use cases and what the problem is that procurement would like to solve. That's why there's very little adoption. Number two, it is actually usually very difficult to use. You know, vendors typically do complain, and we hear that in a positive light when people convert from, say, a system like that to Bonfire. They say, you know, I didn't really like system A, B, and C, and it was too difficult to access. So I think because they're difficult to access, they're kind of difficult to use. They're not widely adopted. And because of all of that, I would say they'll be challenging to implement diverse supplier initiatives with a sourcing module within an ERP. Yeah, so I see a question here about combat bit splitting within the organization. So what I would recommend there, and what we see some people do, is I would centralize the intake process. And so there's a module that lets you do that. And that could be open to anybody within the organization. They can go in and say, I want to get this done. And that's become part of the process at the procurement level. And because all of these are flowing into one pipeline, into the procurement department, at that point, you can begin to put together basically maybe needs from across different departments within the organization to unite them under one activity. Or you probably will know of a contract that exists that covers certain need, and then you can eliminate the process altogether. The reason why I know that is we have a 10% conversion from intake request to a project that we're seeing in the platform. So what that tells me is a lot of these requests are actually being deflected or combined together. Otherwise, would have more of a one-to-one, one-to-one pairing between intake request and project. I hope I answered that question. But it really starts, I think, at the process level, enforcing it, and then getting visibility into the activity that's happening, and that eliminates kind of having that bit splitting that you mentioned.
If we have any other questions, you can place those in chat or the Q&A box.
Yeah, and I do want to thank everyone for contributing the questions. I mistakenly did not roll down my blind before this. It was an overcast day, and now the sun is reflecting straight here to my face. Apologies if everything is looking a little bit off, or I'm squinting here. So lesson learned: never trust the clouds. All right, so I think the questions are drying up here. You can always feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to chat. Love to chat about procurement in general. Any feedback on future, data that you'd like us to kind of present and collect. The report will have a lot more data points than these ones were just presented. These are ones that we just took as kind of like main themes that we saw that spoke to how did things change from the pandemic onwards, and we wanted to just compare them to what things were like when they were normal, quote unquote, in 2019. But in the report, you'll find many other insights. And if you actually can download previous year's reports, there are things that we put in that are probably applicable across the board, like how often do evaluators log in to do their evaluation? And how many sessions does it take them to complete their evaluation? And what times of the day do they actually log in? We saw clear patterns there with evaluators going home, having dinner, and then you can see them log in to do some scoring. we saw, people at lunch, kind of like there's a bit of an increase in the number of evaluations happening there. So there's really cool stats that we usually kind of publish every time. They're always a little bit different, but if this stuff you find interesting, there's about maybe 4 or 5 reports of a similar type on our website that you can dig through. So yeah, it looks like there's no more questions that have come in. I want to thank you for the attention, for the questions, and for the comments throughout. As always, you can reach out to us. If you want to chat with me, I'd love to chat procurement. There's nothing I like more than just kind of talking shop. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Omar, Angela, and our audience for their participation. Please take time to fill out the evaluation survey. Once we end the webinar, you receive a prompt to take that. Both the recording and survey links will also be emailed to you later this afternoon. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.